Volker Buscher, Director of Technology Innovation for Arup. Shane Mitchell, Director for Urban Innovation for Cisco. And my good friend Yuri Parizhek, Director of Smart Cities Program for IBM Research. So that's roughly the order of play. I've asked them each to speak for about 15, 20 minutes or so. Then we'd have some discussion on that particular talk, and then I'm hoping there'll be some time left at the end for more of a group discussion as well. So, Volker, please lead off.
Great. I have a smart challenge for myself. I changed my iPad to a smaller iPad, so my notes are now smaller, and I'm trialing a new stylus, which is so far the most expensive one I've bought in the smart world, and it's not yet working the way it was intended to work, and the cheap one I had before actually was better. So I might have to read more carefully from my notes than I usually do.
Steve Jobs never wanted you to use a stylus.
I know, he was wrong actually, because the one I had before was pretty good. But who's there to criticize Steve Jobs? What I wanted to talk about is our work in Arup is about cities in sort of three dimensions we're thinking now. One is around what we call the new urban context, that basically cities are facing challenges that are so material to them as an individual place and to the world at large that they have to be solved. You know, we have to do something about that. And the second bit, and we call it the new urban context, and I'll explain that a bit more in a second. The second one is what we do within Arups, or deal with in Arups, is then to deliver that, there are some new infrastructures going in, physical infrastructures. You know, the heat network that we looked at in London, that we're working on in London, is a very different way of distributing cooling and heat in cities, or rolling out cycling schemes where you can use the bike. Well, you can use the bike when you cycle on it, obviously, but you can also take it onto a bus or into a taxi or onto a train completely seamlessly. Are actually physically different cities. You know, so there's a new physical city emerging that we need. And then the third dimension is the idea of a smart city, which we define in that context as a city that uses digital assets and information management as a strategic intervention, as something which is as important as transport planning or crime or housing or anything else. So in the context of London, and as a member of the Smart London Board, I'm not sure I'm supposed to say that, the transport budget in London is X billion, the policing budget in London is 4.5 billion, the digital assets and information budget in London is probably coverable through one of my credit cards. So the scale right now, how a city is dealing with digital assets and information, particularly in a lot of European cities, is not really understood. So I make some statements up front. I think we will have more technology in the future, more in terms of volume and more in terms of capability. And we will have more data. We will have a lot of people living in cities. And we will have to deliver a great place to live and work to those people, because a lot of them have more and more choice in where they want to live and how they want to live in their city. We will have to decouple how we do that from the consumption of resources. And that's what I meant by this new urban context we are facing. If we don't solve that problem, then we're all pretty much screwed anyway, anywhere in the world. So the notion that we can continue with urbanization and population growth and not get more effective in the way we use resources or produce waste, it's just not going to work out good for any of us. We have to create jobs. That's one of the paramount, I think, roles of the city, to be effective in the way we produce jobs. So I think we need smart cities. You know, I think this notion that we will have less technology, or that some of these things I've described, is just a completely unrealistic assumption. The notion that we will lose less digital assets or we will use less information in cities is a completely theoretical statement, which I just fundamentally disagree with. So while I think what I just said is undebatable, we did end up in a debate about this, and I think this panel is part of that debate. And the debate is about us and them. Us, the technology industry, and when I say that, I usually mean actually them, and not us, the clever consultants who have all the right answers, obviously. You know? I just want to clarify that.
Thank you very much.
And them, and what I mean by the other them, not them, is the commentators and the planners and the architects that are currently shaping the cities, and the economists that are developing the frameworks in which we develop policy for cities, who started to question whether this role of digital assets and information is actually true, and that actually the city isn't about technology. The city is about a benign environment, a great place to live, and at a humane scale, where the individual, the citizen, is at the heart of the city. It is not about technology. The problem is that is just fundamentally the wrong discussion. And it was first created by them, the technology companies, through portraying techno-centric, or I don't know if John is here, John Pollack has a great techno-utopian future or view of the future, which I think is a great phrase in that, and focused exclusively on functional improvements, congestion, command and control centers, energy optimization, all of that stuff. By the way, we need most of that, but it completely focused the debate of smart cities on functional improvements in cities. What followed then was a response from the planners and the other commentators that started to question the validity that digital assets and information are a strategic asset in cities, and that actually we don't have to worry about that so much, and that instead cities are about places and people and the social interactions between them. And I think this is really dangerous, and I think currently in some cities, in some places where we work, we are stuck in that debate, and it is stopping a meaningful dialogue about the political role, the functional role, the economic, and the environmental role that digital assets and information can play in cities. And it might also prevent the political and the civil executive in cities to wake up to this new challenge and to establish their role within a smart city. And if that doesn't happen, I think we are not just in trouble for what I said earlier, that we have real challenges around how cities work and what citizens want, then another front will open up in front of it, and that is basically that the deployment of more and more technology will happen in a political vacuum, where a debate around privacy, security, and inclusion will not take place, because a purely industry-led deployment of technology in cities will focus on shareholder value. And it should be, because that's their job as industry, to deliver shareholder value. So I've got this sort of plea in the industry panel debate that industry changes completely its language and acknowledges that cities are not just functional places, and that in return, those who shape policy and lead cities take this debate more seriously and say the digital assets and information are a strategic asset and a strategic intervention in the way we should lead and run our cities. I've got no slides to show any evidence for that. It's just my view right now. I'm sure I could dig out some if somebody else wants to talk about it another day.
Well, so nothing very provocative there. Do we have any questions, comments, observations specifically for Volker at this point? We'll have the chance towards the end to have a group discussion as well.
Thanks, Colin. I just want to agree with the way you've just framed that proposition. I think it's absolutely spot on. I spend my life involved in discussions of that sort, and I can see that polarization growing at the moment. And I think it's extremely dangerous, and I think it arises exactly the way that you've just described it. And I think the answer can be talking about it. I met with a group of social scientists from around the world at Durham University a couple of months ago, and they'd started out on the sort of anti-technology sort of path you described when we discussed how actually, I think as Colin and Yuri are saying today, how actually smarter cities projects are carried out by people using technology. It started a very different, more productive discussion. I think it's vital that we do it.
It's also Adam Greenfield in New York, I think, is a great tweeterati. I don't know if that word exists. He was at a conference last year in Barcelona where we had a panel with, I don't know, say who the companies are, big companies. And I think it was him. And they were all presenting their videos of what a smart city will look like. And they all looked not the same, but similar. You know, fridges are beautiful, children's are beautiful, everything talks to everybody, apples are polished in a bowl. And we drive to work in our automatic car and arrive there in a beautiful way, you know. The response was really quite negative. You know, the sort of top-down view of a almost dictatorial style around how we should live our lives and use technology, and that the computer tells us what to do. But it is a dangerous assumption if you then take that all the way down to cities are only bottom-up organizations, and everything can be done through small groups and citizens planning their own future. So in London, at some point, we will replace the Oyster card, you know, one of the most successful technical interventions, I think, in cities that has benefited everybody. You know, the people who use the transport, the citizen, the city, the TFR, everybody has benefited from Oyster. But that technology will come to an end. And at that point, we'll face a very interesting choice. If we build a new payment system that 20 million people use a day, or 20 million journeys use a day, or whether we use it to stimulate a micropayment economy, which we could be afterwards exporting to the rest of the world, because everybody will need something like that. So that problem will be solved within a community-based debate of bottom-up discussions, I think is very difficult. And I think the Adam Greenfields can't do that. But the portrayal of the big technology companies as the Death Stars who then sail in and build these new systems doesn't work either.
Ian.
I think often with technology we mix up three different domains, the simple, the complicated and the complex. And in the simple domain, I think technology should just do things. To turn the traffic light from red to green, technology can do that quite effectively. You don't need people in that system doing it. When it gets complicated, you need analytics, you need to complement people with some compute power to give them the tools, the insight to make the right decisions. And then the last level, when it's really complex, and there's lots of systems in cities that are truly complex adaptive systems, you just need to present the data in ways that are understandable. And I think we shouldn't mix those three domains up. And increasingly, more and more is simple and can just be automated.
Very good. Thank you. Any more questions for Volker? Oh.
What is your, surely you have experience in the UK and with local authority, and they sit in massive amount of digital assets and kind of like use some of them and so on. So what do you see as a main barrier of for local authority in the UK or even in Western Europe, because most of the Western Europe or US as well, local authority have a massive amount of digital data about all kinds of things. So what is the barrier to kind of like using them in a better way or in a more integrated way? What you see as kind of the main barrier?
I think the buyer-seller discussion was the second mistake the technology industry made. If you look at the population growth in cities, and then you think just about how many rail tracks have to be built and how many bus lanes have to be built, there's just an enormous business opportunity. We did recently a study for BIS that quantified the smart cities opportunity as we defined it, at a $40 billion or pound, don't mind, opportunity for UK businesses to sell into. So that is real. But the problem is that the role of the city and the local authority is not always that of a buyer. I think they have three roles. I think they are the facilitator of an ecosystem that needs to come together to really get the full value of this digital stuff. They are a buyer and a procurer of technology, and they are a regulator. They're a politically elected authority that needs to set certain parameters and rules on how city might evolve within the city under political governance. That is agreed. So that's the first point. With regard to the buyer, I think it's really difficult because currently what we found that all the cities we reviewed, their buying of technology is highly fragmented. So they don't buy technology as a city. They even within a transport authority, they probably buy. We interviewed Jack Donovan from Esri, the chief executive from Esri recently on that, and he said cities are great. I can sell to a single transport department 125 Esri licenses because they just don't know what they're buying from me. Yeah? And I think that's what's happening to a large extent right now. And cities will have to change that. Industry can't change that. But their more important role is probably that of a facilitator of the ecosystem. Because even a city like London that has a 11 billion budget per year, of which I think 4.5 is police and
it's
3
more than 4.5 actually.
Yeah,
It's more like 60%.
yeah, and 3 billion might be transport. That is still insignificant and almost within the total amount of what's happening within London around technology. Equally, if you want to solve the transport problem, there is no public sector on its own that can deliver a multimodal transport service to the citizens. So the city can't do it on themselves anyway. Yeah, I'm sure that answers your question.
Very good. I think perhaps we should move on then to